carried. Excellent, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Apologies for the slight delay. I'm going to try and get through as much as we can because this is my assumption is this is the last year before the December break. But let's see if we can pull that off. We were learning the Gemara on Ein Daled on the base that spoke about the source of kosher, and you know, can I actually just, we were talking about mute before, can I just ask everyone to mute themselves because I'm getting a little bit of interference. I think Edward, you're the only one actually not muted. Thank you. Please unmute yourselves, obviously, if you want to ask something. So we were learning kosher and the Gemara's suggestion of the source of kosher from tying the ureus to the sedus, on which the Gemara said this is kosher al manas lahatir, and we discussed the unique nature of kosher, that in many melachos, all melachos, there's a concept that it has to have a certain kiyum in order for it to be significant enough to be a melacha, has to have a certain degree of permanence. Nonetheless, kasher is near unique in that it, even if it's permanent in and of in itself, but it is al manas lahatir, I intend to undo it, that's already enough to stop it being a melacha. And we said this is a unique quality in the melacha of kosher which can't be extrapolated or extended easily to other melachas. I want to touch very briefly on two other melachas which are somewhat analogous to kosher and where perhaps we find a similar halacha. So that's the first thing I wanted to do in today's shiur. The second thing I wanted to do in today's shiur was read the Gemara, which we haven't completely done, and just understand the proofs or sources the Gemara says for the concept of kosher. And this will be somewhat of the chazara from the earlier shiur when we were looking at the Gemara. Now, there are two melachos somewhat analogous to kosher in that they're both an attaching type melacha, and this is tofer, sewing, and oreig, weaving. The next melacha actually that we learn will be tofer. So this is advance notice for when we start in the beginning of January. We will learn that little sugya, that couple of line sugya together, Emiyat Hashem. But for now, is there an equivalent concept of kiyum, well, menas lahatir, with tofer? And if yes, would perhaps the reason be because it is analogous to kosher? So we find actually a machlokas, rather than printing the Rishonim who talk about this, the machlokas is brought in the Ramah, and I printed this in source 1. The Ramah is in Simon Shin Yod Zayin Sif Gimel. The Ramah is talking about undoing matir rather than doing stitches, and he mentions incidentally afal gav dahatafira eina shel kayama, even though this is a stitch which isn't shel kayama, meaning to say physically the stitch is shel kayama because it weaves in and out. It's a double stitch, it's not just a single thread going through. And in Hilchas Tefira, when we learn that, we will see that's enough to make it the melacha. Nonetheless, since it's knotted, and as the Gemara will later explain, that's enough. The knot stops the slipping out, and therefore that's enough to make it the melacha. Nonetheless, here says the Ramah, even though it's not shel kayama, meaning your intention is, well, when you made the stitch was to undo it. Nonetheless, ein chiluk b'tefira ben kayama le'ein shel kayama. So the first opinion says there's no chiluk in tefira between kayama or not kayama, meaning to say the second form of kiyum, intentionality type of kiyum, there's no chiluk between whether it is shel kayama or not. Now, why would you say that? The answer is, well, why wouldn't you say that? We don't find it with any melacha other than with kosher. And there's no source for tofer to say that this should be like kosher. But then the Ramah brings an alternative view. The Yeshiva-style b'tefira she'eina shel kayama. Some argue and are matir with the tefira shel kayama. It says ve'eina lahatir b'fnei am haaretz. This view would agree, don't do so in front of an am haaretz. It's a dangerous thing to do because it lends itself to misunderstanding because of the nuance of the svara. Now, the Ramah brings the source from Hagar's Madcha and from the Beis Yosef. I'm not going to go through which Rishonim hold which for the purposes of this discussion. We're not learning Tofer, other than to say that this is a very fascinating discussion. There's no Gemara, unlike with Tofer, that with kosher, that says that al manas lahatir is not a melacha. So why are the Rishonim arguing? Well, the first opinion holds al-manas lahatir doesn't stop it being a melacha because fundamentally it is a proper stitch and it has a kiyum. And the alternative view says no, we can extrapolate from kasher to toifa because since kosher is a chibur type melacha and toifa is also a chibur type melacha, if you find with kasher there's this unique leniency of al-manas lahatir, the same lomdos, the same svara should apply to toifa. So this is with respect to toifa, we find such a machlokus, and that's source one for sort of something roughly analogous to kosher, where we find that it has a machlokus, how things would apply legabe toifa. There is a similar machlokus with respect to oreig, and again, I don't want to go too much into the sugya, other than to say there is a fascinating Gemara on Daf Tzadi Daled Omud Base, which I put in the source sheet, about a gedeles. The Mishnah says a gedeles plaiting on Shabbos is a woman's not allowed to plait her hair on Shabbos. And the Gemara discusses why. What malacha would this be? Why on earth shouldn't you be able to plait? And the Gemara initially assumes that the issue is oreig, which is reasonable. It's weaving. I'm taking you through source 2 now on the handout. And the Gemara's maskana is it's not because of oreig, because it's not derech ariga. And then the Gemara learns remarkably that it's binyan. And the Gemara says, how on earth can it be derech binyan? And it learns out from some form of gezeras hakosov that plaiting is a type of binyan. Why is it a type of binyan? Because building is putting disparate pieces together to create a new structure, and plaiting the hair together is putting disparate pieces together to create a new structure. I don't want to go for now into the binyan aspect of it because this is a very, very strange and difficult idea that plaiting hair is a binyan of sorts, whether the Gemara means deraisa or whether the Gemara only means as a drabonon. Nonetheless, this is what the Gemara says. Now, why would it not be oreig? Says the Gemara because it's ein derech hariga b'kach. What does it mean it's not the derech hariga? I mean, surely this is weaving. It says Tosfos because ein sofer l'skayin she'emedes l'stira. The second explanation Tosfos gives is because this is an oreig al-manas lahatir, because my intention is to unravel it. Great. So the problem is that my intention is to unravel it. We can now ask the question, if intention to unravel is enough to stop it being the melacha of oreig, why isn't it also enough to stop it being the melacha of boina? What has the Gemara achieved when it says it's boina, not oreig? And a possible answer to this question, again, in the source sheets I printed, the Shulchan Aruch about this, the Mishnah Berurah, on the topic, the Shahad Sion and so on. But the very brief answer is, this would be a possible answer to this question would be a source, that oreig shares with kosher and perhaps with toifa this unique feature that even though fundamentally it has a kiyum, because if you plait your hair and you leave it plaited, it can last for a long time, that the almanas lister, the intentionality to unravel it would be enough to stop it being melacha. So we find again with oreig, like with kosher and like with toifa, a possibility that it has unusual features and unusual halachas of almanas, of intentionality to unravel, something which fundamentally it has a kiyum to it. Now, if we say that oreig and toifa, weaving and sewing, are like kosher, then it's very nice. It fits well that all the chaburah and melachos have this commonality. If we argue, if it turns out, like as per the opinion in the Ramah and the opinion in the Mishnah Berurah and so on, that disagree with this distinction, the answer would be that kosher is unique, that the whole chashivas is the chibur. Because what's unique about kosher is that in a certain sense it's artificial. You see a lot there. It's just joining two separate things, and the join remains in a sense permanently just as a chibur, as two discrete items, as opposed to sewing or weaving, when out of the two separate items comes something new. When you look at a woven garment, this isn't stuck together threads. This achieves a new functionality, a new status of a cloth. It's no longer threads, it's a cloth. Similarly, when cloths are sewn together, it's no longer a cloth, they are now a garment. So the svara to say that this is different, that this is only a logic and only a reason in kosher but not in the other melachos, is that kosher is unique in that it's only a chibur. That's the whole nature of the melacha, nothing else. as opposed to orig and toifa, where they become something new. In the same way as baked bread is no longer dough, it's now bread. It has a new shape, a new functionality. Similarly, these melachos have a new functionality. And that would be the argument to say that this rule of almanas lahate only applies to kosher. And the counter argument would be no, we can compare all three melachos because they're all chibur type melachos. Jeffrey.
Thank you. I'm just trying to work out how this fits in or doesn't fit in with, I think it was the Aruch HaShulchan where we saw before, where that tofer was something that was almost irreversible. That when you unstitch something, wasn't it that was that his definition of tofer was that you couldn't undo it, and that's quite different to what we're seeing here, where we're talking about a theoretical almanas lahate.
So you would have the same discussion in the Lomdus of the Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan was part of a family of ways of viewing toifa different to kosher because it somehow becomes one in a deeper way, either because of the functionality or because of how it's done, but it becomes one in a deeper way. So again, you would now have the same argument. So what happens if it's almanas lahate? Do we jump one way and say, well, so what? Since it's fundamentally permanent, my intention is neither here nor there. Structurally, intrinsically, it's permanent. The rule of a melacha that's not niskayim is where structurally it's weak, not where structurally it's sound, and my intention is to unravel it. Or do we say, no, it can be compared to chibur, to kesher, where my intentionality, gufa, means it hasn't become one, it hasn't altered the functionality, because my intention was never to be this permanently, and therefore it hasn't become something new. So again, you can jump both ways in these svaras.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so basically just
isn't there an additional point in the Ramah, which is if something is done by a professional craftsman, even if it's not intended to be permanent, the fact that it's done by a craftsman, at least as far as sewing is concerned, is enough to make it a malacha. Now that doesn't appear to apply in knotting.
I don't want to go too much into toifa other than to say there are parallel discussions with kesher also. We haven't done those because there's a whole period around what makes a knot a knot. But that aspect is in a sense it's a separate discussion with its own complexities. I didn't want to go into that. There's a whole period, and therefore it simply wasn't feasible in these 3 lines of kesher that we're learning to go into what qualifies something as a fundamentally permanent and good quality knot or not. So that's okay. Okay, so this. Sorry, yeah.
So I was just wondering if it would make a difference to the discussion of plaiting hair if it was done by a hairdresser rather than an amateur.
So the Gemara says not. According to Tosfos' reading of the Gemara, no matter how the hairdressing is done, since it's Ein Sofi Niskayim, because you always have intention to unravel the hair, therefore that wouldn't qualify as a malacha. And Orig shares this commonality with kosher, that intentionality stops it having a kiyum. Okay, so this is in the sense of finishing off of the last topic in the last year. The Gemara carries on, and the Gemara says, Shiur b'mishkan heichahava, Omar Rava shekin koshrim b'yasedus aholim, Omar le'abaya hu kosham nas lahatzehu, and Omar abaya shekin erge yurias, etc. I simply want at this point to do chazara of the Yerushalmi that we looked at the beginning of the sugya. And if you look at the Yerushalmi, the Yerushalmi brings 2 views. It brings the view of Rav Yossa and the view of Rav Yosa. I don't know how else to distinguish between the pronunciation of the 2. Rav Yosa holds that we do learn from the tying of Yesedos and Orim, and this is because he holds that this is not called kosher almanas lahate. Why? Because al pi hadibur hayuchonim, they would travel based upon the instruction of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, in the previous shiurim, and I'm not going to go through it again, we looked at 2 other parallel sources that thought that the fact that something was al pi hadibur changed the halachic nature of how we view it. One was another Yerushalmi with respect to permanence of building. And the final one was a Gemara in earlier in the Bavli, in Lamed Aleph on the base, who talks about the halacha that boineh, that soisa, is only a malacha if it's almanas livnos, in preparation to build. And the Gemara is discussing whether this has to be almanas livnos bin koimo, where your preparation to build in the same place. The logic being that soisa, destroying a building, is not its own autonomous malacha. It's a preparatory malacha to rebuilding, to creating a new building. And therefore only if I just dismantle, that's not a malacha. If I dismantle to clear the ground to build something else there, that's a malacha. Asked the Gemara, well, building and soisa in the Mishkan wasn't to rebuild in the same place. And the Gemara answered, no, that was different because al pi Hashem, they were camping and decamping based upon the commandment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, we saw over there two ways to understand that Gemara. Rabbeinu Chananel understood this on a functional level. Since it was al pi Hashem, they never knew. Maybe they would be commanded to put the Mishkan back up in the same place again. They didn't know where they would be next time they built the Mishkan. That was the sort of functional way of learning the Gemara. The alternative way of learning the Gemara is that the Gemara is telling us a concept, a londos. Since it's al pi Hashem, the place they are located in is where HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells them to camp, and if we don't view the location as geographic, but as mitzvah linked, where the tzivoy is of where they should be, that determines the place, and therefore if they dismantle and rebuild even somewhere else geographically, it's still in a Mokum HaMikdash, it's the place to find by Hashem, and therefore uniquely in that particular era, this is considered an al pi Hashem, this is considered rebuilding in the same place. Now, I don't want to talk again about boineh, which is a separate malacha, but I just want us to think for a few moments about this Yerushalmi around kosher, because if we understand the Yerushalmi to be saying that the reason this is considered kosher or manas lahate is because it's possible that they would have to reset up. It's possible that they would stay in this place for a long time. And as the Gemara says, this is kosher or manas lahate. This isn't, let me rephrase that. The Gemara says this isn't a permanent malach of kosher when they tie the pegs to the tent poles, to the Yeseidas, when they tie the cloths to the pegs, because there's no permanence, because their plan is al manas lahate, to travel on. On that, Rav Yasa answers, no, it's al pi Hashem. Now, what's his answer? So what if it's al pi Hashem? The answer is it's al pi Hashem. Therefore, they have no idea when they are going to travel or not. So they're doing this for now, and they're not even thinking about the future. They don't know when they'll have to travel. And therefore, this is considered a permanent melacha. So we see from this that a kosher al manas lahate, the allowance of kosher al manas lahate, isn't where you are specifically intending to keep the knot for a long time. It's even where you just simply aren't thinking about it, that would also be enough to create the issa of kosher. And the logic of this is that fundamentally this is a permanent knot. If it's al manas lahate, I am being mafkia, I am removing the significance of it. I'm removing the permanence which it naturally is imbued with. So it's not that I need a positive intention for it to be permanent to make me chayav in the melacha of kosher. It's the other way around. If I have a positive intention to unravel the knot, that would remove my chayav of kosher. And therefore, the Yerushalmi is arguing that in a situation where I'm not thinking about it at all, because I'm surrendering, I simply have no idea what will be, because al pi Hashem, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu will determine when I unravel it or not. That is enough to make it the melacha of kosher, even though I am aware that at some point I will have to unravel it, because at some point I'm going to journey onwards. So this is it,
I'll just ask my David, is it, would you say Butler Doctor Etzel Kolodom here at all, or is it subjective?
No, I don't think there would be a Butler Datu, normally speaking. Because normally speaking, if I'm making a knot, I'm the owner of this knot, and I know what I'm planning to do with it. And if I'm planning to unravel it, then that means it's not a kesher shel kayama. The Yerushalmi is arguing there's a Butler Data Eitzel Das Hamokum. your das's bottle, I'm not in the way we've used bottle das in other cases. Just simply means that as a human, I'm not even thinking about the nature of when I will unravel it or not. I'm just doing what I need to do now. I'm pragmatic. I'm attaching the Mishkan now, aware in my mind that tomorrow I may need to leave, or I may end up staying here for 38 years as per the encampments in Kodesh Barnea. I simply have no idea what the future is going to bring. It's Al Pi Hashem. We're not in charge of the journey. If this is a natural band of travelers, Bedouin, who are traveling through, or a caravan traveling through the desert, and they're under the leadership of the caravan chief, and the simple traveler puts up his tent, and he has no idea what the plans of the guide is, how long they're going to stay, this lomdus wouldn't apply. Because there we would say the opposite. This is a sofek. You just don't know how long you're putting up for, and therefore my awareness is this is Amanas Lahatir. I just don't know exactly when the Amanas Lahatir will be. However, in this situation where it isn't a human guide, there's a surrender of reason, and therefore it's Al Pi Hashem Yachnu. I have absolutely no idea, with absolutely no intentionality there.
Even so, surely they knew that Hashem would at some point tell them to move on, so it's not like they're thinking it's never going to happen.
So there's two ways to answer this question. Either you can answer that at some point a kasher that's Almanas Lahatir becomes a kasher Shakayoma. If my intentionality is to undo it in 30 years' time, nothing in this world lasts forever. That's the sad truth. So at some point or other, I'm going to, I know that anything I'm doing is going to be impermanent. So one way of understanding this is that in the Rach's understanding, the application of the Rach, they know at some point they're going to move on, but this may be in 30 years' time. They have no idea how long this is, and therefore this is enough to make it a Kesher Shel Kayama, because they don't know how long this will be. No one knows quite what the shear is of at what point would intentionality to unravel cease to be halachically significant. I didn't go into this just because the shortage of time. The Beis Yosef brings a Rabbeinu Yerucham who speaks about a shear of a chatzi shana, half a year. It's not entirely clear where he gets this shear from. As far as that's long enough, it's already half a year. This is long enough that this would be considered a kasher shel kayama. But that's one way of understanding the Gemara, that they simply have no idea what's happening over here. The alternative way of understanding it is a lomdus, parallel to what we said with Boina and the Gemara and Daf Lamed Aleph. The Gemara's point is, I am now making a permanent structure. Where HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells me to camp is permanent. When he tells me to move, that's the chiddush, that's the innovation. It's not that now my intentionality is to unravel it. It's my intentionality is, Al Pi Hashem Yachnu, the significance of the mitzvah is, where we are is where we are. This is now our location. This has been determined as where we are. When the tzivah comes to move, that's a new bria, a new creation that comes to the world. That's a genuine innovation that comes to the world. And at this point, the halacha, at this point, then I undo it. But for now, this is where I permanently am. So this is the next point I wanted to make on the sugya. Can I have a very brief show of hands? Is anyone unable to stay for about 5 minutes after the 1:30? Because this is the last sugya and I'd like to finish it, but I just want to see if I have enough. If anyone is unable, please let me know. Otherwise, hold your peace. Okay, so I apologise. I normally try and keep share to time, but we will go 5 minutes over. If you're unable to stay on, the truth is there'll be a recording available of this. So I just don't have to rush this unduly. So this is the second point really I wanted to make on the sugya, that the parallel discussion that the Rabbeinu Chananel and the other Rishonim have in the sugya of Boina, which is the source in the Bavli that we have for a sort of a kin concept. Unfortunately, Yerushalmi, we don't have Rishonim. However, we can seemingly translate across the idea the two methods of interpretation, and the Yerushalmi is either teaching us a one-off halacha only applicable to the situation in the midbar of when Hashem is commanding us, in which case we can't really derive halachas from it, or the Yerushalmi is teaching us a concept that where I'm simply not thinking about undoing it, I just don't consider the possibility one way or another, that's enough. And the lomdus would be because it's not b'shat that this is something which either is permanent or not, and my intentionality determines it to be permanent or not. No, it's fundamentally permanent. My intentionality to unravel it removes the permanence. If I don't have, therefore, conscious intentionality to unravel it, that would be then it would revert back to default setting, which is that this is a permanent knot. So this is, in which case this would be an important halacha that we learn for other situations. And indeed, the poskim discuss this. The final point I wanted to make on the sugya, which is also really chazara in a sense, is there is a machlokas how to learn the question of the Gemara. When the Gemara says, the answer of the Gemara, where the Gemara says, so the Gemara says the source of matir in the Mishkan is when they used to undo knots, when two knots appeared next to each other. Now, what I want to do in the next few minutes is first of all understand pshat in that Gemara, and then understand the lomzus, because there's an important conceptual difference depending on how you translate this Gemara. So on our page, all we see is Rashi, and Rashi says that the explanation is that if you had two knots next to each other, in other words, two threads snapped. When a thread snaps when you're weaving, you knot the threads together so it won't unravel. If you have two threads that snap next to each other in the same parallel place, and you knot both of them together, when you weave it, the pattern of the weaving happens to be that these two knots end up next to each other. At that point, you get a visible knot, because it's not just one knot which is barely seen, but it's two, and you will undo one of the knots so that you don't have a sort of lump in the middle of your garment. This is how Tosfos Rashi learns. There is an alternative view, which is Rabbeinu Chananel, and Rabbeinu Chananel is brought in Tosfos on Ein Gimel Amud Aleph. And therefore, for two reasons, we need to look at Tosfos on Ein Gimel Amud Aleph. The first is because he brings an alternative pshat in the sugya, that of Rabbeinu Chananel, and the second is because there's a very, very important discussion in Tosfos over there. And I want to just summarize this outside and then call on us to look at Tosfos inside. The Mishnah in Ein Gimel Amud Aleph lists all the 39 melachos, and with some of the melachos, the Mishnah says explicitly that the malacha has to be done al manas, on condition to do something. So, for example, it says kosei, writing is a malacha, and moichek isn't a malacha unless it's moichek al manas lichtoi shtei oisos, in order to write two letters. Similarly, the Mishnah says toifa is a malacha, but kosher, but matir, tearing is not a malacha unless it's al manas litva, in order to sew. So basically speaking, toifa is a malacha, but tearing is only a malacha if it's al manas litva, in order to be sewn. Kosev is a malacha, but moichik, erasing, is only a malacha if it's al manas lichtun. That means to say that mechika, or tearing, erasing or tearing, isn't choshev a malacha in and of itself. It's rather a preparatory stage for doing a new writing or a new tearing. Now, Tosfos wants to know whether matir is the same. Kosher is a malacha. Is matir only a malacha because it's preparatory to re-knotting, or is it even a malacha when it's not preparatory to re-knotting? Now, the reason to say that it should only be a malacha, that it's only a malacha if it's preparatory, is because intuitively it's an undoing type of malacha, and therefore analogous to moichek, erasing, or korea tearing. The counter argument would be that the Mishnah doesn't explicate this. The Mishnah doesn't say this. When it comes to moichek, the Mishnah explicitly says only when it's preparatory to writing. When it comes to korea, it says it's only when it's preparatory to sewing. However, when it comes to the malacha of matir, the Mishnah doesn't mention this condition. Says Tosfos, if we learn like Rashi in our sugya, I'm daled on the base, that with the woven garment, when they saw that the two knotted threads happened to align with the knot, they would unknot one of them. They didn't redo the knot, in which case we have a raya that matir is even when you don't have intentionality to redo the knot. That you don't need matir al manas likshur. That's Rashi. However, says Tosfos, Rabbeinu Chananel has a different reading in the Gemara, which Tosfos and Rabbeinu Chananel believe fits better the words of the Gemara. And Rabbeinu Chananel learns that the Gemara's two knots that it's talking about is in one thread. If the thread breaks, you knot it. If it then breaks again a bit further down, you don't knot it for a second time further down, such that you continue this thread by knotting it twice along its length. You undo both knots, remove the little middle piece, and then knot it once in the middle. In that case, and that's what the Gemara is saying, is when you undo a knot, is when a thread breaks twice, you remove the small middle piece and just attach it in the middle one. In that case, you have a kosher almanas lahatir, the matter almanas kosher, niksho. You're unknotting it in order to reknot it, and therefore in Rabbeinu Chananel, we can learn that the scenario is where you are knotting in order to unknot. So this is an important machlokas, Rabbeinu Chananel and Rashi, which has implications for whether there is a halacha of knotting and of unknotting only when it's almanas liksher. I'm feeling that I'm rushing and I'm keeping people here beyond time. This and going beyond our allocated time. I can see that I apologise for this. I mistimed myself and there's too much material to get through. Tuesday, what I would say is as follows. At 9:30, I will give a share. I don't know if it'll be a full half an hour share, but I'll give 20 minutes worth of share, something like that, to finish us off. If you haven't had a chance to look at the sugya yet, please have a look at Tosfos on Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph. And also, for those of you who are in the share, when we learned Tosfos on the base of Tzorech L'Eitzim, please also have a look at Tosfos there on Ayin Gimel on the base, because we'll do a little bit of chazara there. In the previous handout, I printed the Ritva. Have a look again at the Ritva, and I will also do chazara on that. And I hope we'll be able to tie together a lot of loose strings, please excuse the pun, and finish off the sugya in a respectable ways.